Good morning. Thank you to everyone for joining us today, the Great Soils webinar on soil health for horticulture with Paul Flynn from the Soil Association. My name is Ben Raskin and I'm the Head of Horticulture at the Soil Association, and I'm chairing the webinar today. The Great Soils is a programme of work funded by AHDB Horticulture and includes projects CP 107, 107B, 107C and 107D. The project 107B, Growing Resilient, Efficient and Thriving Great Soils, is delivered in partnership by Earthcare Technical Limited and the Organic Research Centre and the Soil Association. So before we get started, I just wanted to let you know about the control panel we're using today. So in order to avoid background noise interference, we've actually muted you all. We will be recording the session and we can share this afterwards. So Paul will do his presentation and then we'll open up questions at the end. During the presentation, you can submit questions via the chat box, but if you direct them to the organisers, I'll then sort of feed them through to Paul during the session. We may not get time for all of them, so if yours doesn't get covered, then save it till the end of the session. Once we get to the Q&A session at the end, if you want to ask a question, then you can click on the raised hand icon, which you should be able to see, and then you'll hear a voice letting you know that you've been unmuted, and then once you hear that, you can ask your question. So we'll make a start. As I mentioned before, our presenter is Paul Flynn. He's Arable and Soils Advisor at the Soil Association, and I'll now hand over to Paul, who's going to introduce himself and host today's session on soil health for horticulture.
Okay, well, thank you, Ben. I hope you can all hear me all right. Thank you very much for joining us. I had a quick look at who's there. Quite a nice range of folk from all sorts of backgrounds, right through the supply chain and beyond. So thank you very much for coming and joining us. Ben did say questions at the end. If you have something that you really want to say and you know, you feel like you need a bit of help with something, just let Ben know. Perhaps just type in your question, and I've let Ben encourage Ben to make sure that we've got some dialogue there and that we can talk to you and listen to you. We're here for your benefit. We're here to try and answer some questions, try and inform about managing soils for horticulture. This is the end of a long program, and I do feel quite honoured to represent those who've sort of been involved for much longer than I have. And I'll do my best to share what's been done so far. So let's have a look at what's coming up. So I've tried to make it fairly practical. My background certainly is just that. Mostly in farming, but also more recently in teaching for the last 6 years. So we'll try and cover the things that we can do, we can change, things that we can improve around soils. I have got probably far too many slides as usual. I am hardwired for about a 90-minute lecture. That's my day job on a Thursday and Friday. So I will try and squeeze it down. What I have done is to put in a lot of content, a lot of links to other resources to help you, so that in your own time you could come back and look at those. And also for quite a few slides, a lot of detail there with just 2 or 3 main points highlighted. So forgive me if I don't share with you all the slide contents, but there is again more stuff there if you want to come back to later. All right, so let's have a look first of all at the challenges, and I hope that you recognize some of these. We've been speaking to farmers and growers and folk in the industry for the last 3 years, and as far as I could pick up from our conversations, often quite lengthy, often quite extended sessions, that the growers and the suppliers and the buyers, there are some really big challenges there for you, and some of those. The increased weight of machinery. We're looking at much more productive machines now, but they do carry a huge weight. An increased frequency of tillage. We can and we are able to grow several crops in 1 year, particularly inside protected cropping. A demand for increased work rates. We want to produce and make sure our business is working. We have got some amazing machines that can actually work at suboptimal conditions, and that's both a blessing and I suppose a bit of a difficulty at the same time. We've got low and reducing nutrient content of the produce itself. That's been a sort of 50-year I suppose pattern, and then the market pressures. higher product specification. The buyers, and I know there are some there with us today, and thank you for joining us. Obviously, you want exactly what you want. You're very clear about that, and you know, the growers have to respect that. But that does mean quite a challenge for managing soils. We saw on one of our practical days out at Hunter Pack, harvesting cauliflowers up to 8 times in the same year, having to go back through the crop again and again, looking for that perfect specimen. An expectation of higher marketable yield. We haven't got room to grow just in case anymore. The farm business can't stand that. It hasn't got the room for it. We have to supply as far as possible through the extended season, and of course we're much more specialized, and that has quite a big agronomic impact on the business. And again, this is a webinar. I'd encourage you to share with us what your experiences are as well. The term great soils came from my colleague Ben, growing resilient, efficient and thriving soils. So I thought we'd start with, how do we measure that? Well, its ability to sustain high yield reliably. That's kind of, I suppose, where we're at in terms of producing and farming. Healthy plant growth that we can use and we can market. We can look at the nutrient content. This dreadful word, trafficability. Can we get on the land and work it, you know, in a timely fashion? And is the soil workable? Does it actually respond to the machine we're using? We can measure that physically. We can look at crop performance, rooting depth, compaction, water infiltration, visual assessment. We can prize apart the soil, have a look at how blocky, how stable, how friable that soil is, and we can look at how well the soil comes together as a real structure in what we call aggregate stability. I think the important thing is, though, for any operation is to identify the characteristics that you feel are most important to your operation, to define those, to measure and monitor, and set yourself some quite clear long-term objectives. And that might be the case that you're looking for, you know, a 5 or 10-year program. Trying to improve soils and make soils work more effectively is a long-term game. Okay, you'll see right through my presentation, there's a few links there as well. So if you wanted to go back and look at more details, you can just click on those later and have a look at that. So AHDB has put together, or has presented, a visual assessment method for soils. Let's get a little bit technical for 1 or 2 slides. Compaction is one of those things that I think is probably one of the biggest barriers to using soils, you know, efficiently, to having a resilient soil. And the picture down the bottom left-hand side is that of a root tip trying to get down through the soil. And you can see this is something quite delicate, quite fragile. Yes, it has a root cap. It's designed to allow the passage of the true root tip, the apical meristem, right behind it. But that is a sensitive thing. It's a rather delicate thing. Once it's got in amongst the soil, it can exert tremendous pressure, but it has to get down there first. And the graph to the right-hand side, I hope in some way begins to explain the difference, that if that soil is not compacted, if it is workable, friable, it's in good condition, then actually we can get a much better yield for the same input. So for example, at nitrogen levels of 100 kilograms per hectare, we can look at a significantly higher yield compared to that in a more compacted, more dense soil. Again, just keeping it practical, we all know that we can use a subsoiler, and we saw this done so well at Hunter Pack, if I can say that. But this is something that I think we overestimate. Certainly on the farms that I'm involved with, you know, we do use this in the headlands, in the gateways. You can just see there that we're just working with the top left-hand corner, that first 80 meters that we've really, you know, been driving through quite a great deal. But we know from research that this is often the benefit is often overestimated. And we saw at Andrew's at Hunter Pack that he was actually designing and building his own subsoilers to be exactly what the ground needed, and in particular to address the compaction behind the tractor wheels. We saw quite a few farms, Anglia salads as well, where we began to see a little bit of more controlled traffic farming, so that when we're carrying out operations, we're doing so on the same ground. We've got tram lines that are, you know, sat-naved up, and they're linked to the glass house, and they're sort of maintained year round. And so that is starting to happen. We are seeing, you know, farmers, growers prevent the damage in the first place. But it was quite clear across the breadth of growers we've been working with, but that's not easy. If you're looking at a good rotation between different plants, that often the axil width is just not the same, and it's just not possible to actually operate in the same way that you might do with an arable farm or under reduced or no tillage. So there's a challenge for us, but it is happening, and we did also see quite a few vehicles that are now tracked, and they spread their weight far more effectively. One little aside at the sort of end of this section on physical characteristics, and a thing that I wasn't aware of, is the benefit or the possible benefit of gypsum. And so we're seeing that, particularly with the clay soil, where we've got this very difficult, challenging condition, and it's the most frequent question I get is, how can I manage a difficult clay soil? That there may be a role for gypsum. Let's look at that. We've got another program which has just started. In fact, actually it's about a couple of years in now, but has a few more years to run, called Innovative Farmers, and that research is really based around what farmers want, what farmers and growers want. So if you're a farmer or grower or working with farmers and growers and you have research ideas, we're very keen to talk to you. And one of those examples is a group of farmers that I'm working with who are looking at gypsum and trying to improve the structure of soils and trying to work with soils that actually are rather poor in structure and tend to collapse. We've just taken our first samples before application. We'll come back in about a month's time, and then again about 3 months' time, and see how that's gone. But the idea is that gypsum will help to bring the clay particles together and form bigger, if you like, aggregates or particles to improve soil structure. Let's have a quick look then at soil chemistry, and this is perhaps somewhere where we're all a bit more sort of on our home turf. We know that we can look at recommendations from RP209, and that's something that we all perhaps know about. But where we do that, are we using all the tools that we could? So do we assess nitrogen content accurately? Do we account for the very high winter rainfall that we've just had? More frequent testing, is that taking place on lighter soils? And do we relate our applications to the product price and to the quality? And also adjust for yield. Finally there, the last one, looking at plant tissue analysis, really quite an informed way of looking at exactly not just what's in the soil, but what's being taken up. Now, here's my favorite slide. This is one that I think on every occasion we spoke to farmers, there was quite a disbelief in the log scale of the pH system. If you weren't aware, the pH scale is a log scale. So it moves by a factor of 10. If we move from a pH of, say, 6.5 to 5.5, well, that's moving tenfold in terms of acidity. So 7 is neutral, but going from 6.5 to 5.5 is becoming more acidic. But it's doing so at a rate of a tenfold rate. So if you feel content with a pH of 5.8, be aware that that's 10 times more acidic than 6.8. If you're growing potatoes, you want it to be quite acidic. You want it to be down at that sort of level. But if you're not, then it makes a huge difference. The other one, if you can just have a look at that slide, excuse me, is that as you move towards a more acidic pH, that you're losing the availability of some of those nutrients. So phosphorus, going from a pH of 6.5 to 6, becomes much less available. And other examples, calcium and magnesium as well.
And Paul, do you think that growers are getting the pH right most of the time, have you seen through the project?
It was quite varied. I mean, if you look at the soil samples that are coming out into the labs, I mean, I know that we sample the worst fields, and we know that we sample where we are suspicious, but the samples coming in are so far out that you've got to think that pH perhaps is something that we need to be a little bit more careful about. I'll say a bit more about that. We have had, we've done quite a few of these, and I haven't really got time to do them all justice. But the team around GREATsoils, in this case, it includes Dr. Audrey Litterick, they've been looking at some test cases in particular, and this one on pH, just making the point there. I won't read the whole thing out, but if you do find evidence that the pH is not quite right, let's move from our kind of typical once every 4 years pH testing to perhaps every year, or at least once every 2 years. And if we've got a suspicion that the pH is starting to come out of spec, have a look at that field. Maybe there's a big in-field variation, and maybe there are pockets of soils that are just not quite where they need to be. Okay. Whilst we're on these sort of these case studies, the other one done by Dr. Martin Wood, and again on both of these cases, and there's a link there to these studies. It would take an entire presentation, I think, to do them justice. But this was an example where Martin Evans from Fresh Growers Limited was looking to try and grow a sort of a chantre carrot, quite specialised, and under quite difficult conditions, land that was previously under very different management, under poultry. We had an index of phosphorus of 5. We've got low calcium, but we need a low pH for growing potatoes, so we can't go in there with too much lime. We had low organic matter, 2.5%. Ideally, we want to be looking above that, maybe 3.5 or more. We don't get that in most of our soils. We often get between 1 and 3%. And we also had there a very low clay content. So we've got a very light soil, quite difficult to work with. So Dr. Martin Wood had a look at that for us and presented an entire case study on that, which you can read in your own time. But the main point is to really think about not just taking the recommendation for the field simply, but actually to use some common sense and really think about your particular situation. So in the case of low calcium, we went back to gypsum and used a source of calcium, which is not really a liming effect, so it didn't change the pH, and also added straw in quite significant quantities to build up organic matter content. And again, with low clay content, we don't have there a great capacity to hang on to nutrients. So we're looking at rather more regular applications of fertilizer and testing every year in that situation. Okay, and also testing for additional nutrients, not just for nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, but for actually, if you look at Fresh Growers test, they're looking for at least a dozen different nutrients. Okay, if I can, Ben, if I'll move on then to soil biology, if that's okay.
Yeah, perfect.
I'm hoping that you're all nice and clear. Yeah. So, I mean, there is, again, a room for an entire presentation on this. And since I was at university, this has moved on so much. But there's a list there that is, almost all of those things we just didn't know about 30 years ago. So we know that the soil biology has a huge contribution to make to soil fertility, to plant growth, and I'll let you look at that in your own time. Can I just make reference to, if you really are super keen, there's a link there called Symphony of the Soil, and that's actually a full-blown film, 90 minutes worth of real investigation into how soils work biologically, and that's a fascinating sort of take on what's going on there. And I think that when we're on the tractor, when we're working and planting and growing crops, sometimes we forget the sensitivity of the soil. This is a growing medium. There are millions of bacteria in every gram of soil, and I don't need to repeat that. I'm sure that's been said several times throughout this program. And it is now possible to test for that, or at least get some indication of how good that health is. If you look at your local soil labs, they can now offer a composite test looking at respiration rate, looking at the number and type of species that are inside that soil, and principally soil organic matter. I suppose for me, soil organic matter is the passport of soil health. If that's low, it's very difficult to really make a soil start to improve its productivity. Okay, and there's a complete copy from the AHDB Guide to Soil Biology. Again, I won't repeat that, but we now understand a little bit better that the mycorrhizal fungi are completely and utterly engaged with most plants. We don't think they are with the brassica so much, but they occupy around and inside the plant and are acting to actually bring and supply nutrients in a symbiotic fashion, far more than we ever imagined. And again, also the entire aspect of nitrogen fixing bacteria, my impression is that we've got a long way to go to really make full use of that. We had a presentation last month from a farmer in mid Wales he was the Grassland Farmer of the Year 2014, and his point was that above every hectare of land was over 700 tons of nitrogen. Okay, it's in a gas form, it's inert, but this bacteria can use that. His question was, well, why don't you? And my favorite thing, this goes back to, my lecturer at university was a guy called Dr. Vic Stewart, and he was the first person, I think, to really nail the benefit of the earthworm to the soil and to plant health. This photograph was taken just 2 weeks ago, just after the heaviest of the snow on one of our growers up in County Durham. Quite an altitude, quite difficult conditions. He's no-till. Now I know that's not perhaps appropriate to a horticultural grower, but I think we're seeing a slight move to reduce cultivation, and that's something that I would definitely encourage where possible, where it's appropriate in terms of disease control, in terms of crop management. I definitely encourage growers to think about, can they reduce that amount of cultivation? Ask the question, why am I cultivating? Often it's to bury debris and to avoid disease, but actually, is that additional operation required? And really think about what we're doing when we operate those machines. I was always shown a picture of a tractor and at college and asked why this was the best tractor. The answer was it had a spade attached to the back of it, and that meant that the driver could jump off and have a look at soil conditions and really think about what he or she had done in terms of that operation. And we saw on our tours around with GREATsoils, one or two growers really attentive, for example, in rotivating, that actually all the tines were set correctly at the right depth, and that they weren't worn, they weren't causing compaction. And that can happen. That can be that really can bite you back if it's not careful. Earthworms, we know, are a very good indicator of soil health. We don't find them there, at least they're uncommon in waterlogged soils, in compacted soils, and in the extremes of pH. We also know, and this is something quite definite, that the very deep burrowing anestic worms, which they'll burrow down to about 2 meters depth, are quite uncommon in intensely cultivated soils. So we know that where we plow and we rotivate and we work soils routinely, that those worms by and large are not present. Even where we've got strips left remaining where they're not cultivated, yes, those areas will contain those worms, but they don't transfer at all easily. It's either one or the other. And again, we've got several different research projects going on looking at the effect of our operations on earthworm numbers. And again, part of the research with County Durham, with the Base UK group, is looking at that. Nice simple slide for a change. So let's just spell out the benefits of organic matter are, that we can hang on to nutrients rather better, we can cling on to them. We've got this improved cation exchange capacity. Really just the capacity to hang on to nutrients is improved. We can retain water, and also we can allow water to infiltrate a little bit more quickly. We've got structural stability. That means that when we operate the soil, when we have high rainfall, when we have testing conditions, the soil is inclined to stay rather more workable.
And what's that picture showing there, Paul?
Oh, I beg your pardon. Sorry, just the difference in two different soils. So to the right-hand side, we've got organic matter there just slightly higher, and you can just see by the colour that actually is a little bit darker. The left-hand side, you might just see, and this is they are both from the same soil type, but from different fields. Left-hand side, rather more compaction, rather less friable soils. If I gave that a score of sort of 1 to 5, I'd be giving that a slightly poorer score. Okay.
Yep. Thanks.
Okay, so back to another one of our case studies, and this is looking at, well, how can we, if organic matter is so important, how can we improve that? And this was a very detailed and very long, extended research trial looking at different inputs. And the main thing that came out of this for me, I think, I'm sure that Audrey will put me right if I'm wrong, but that actually the use of green waste compost seemed to be a very effective way of picking up organic matter. It's already been composted, so the organic material that remains after that process, now organic matter, is resistant to further decay. So actually that was building organic matter quite quickly. And that's one vehicle that we could really advocate, I think, for farmers to use. Having said that, there were a few growers that we worked with that said actually they weren't allowed to use it. The feeling was that from the buyer that the risk was just too much. And I think I can understand that. When this process first started, I think we did see quite a few bits of plastic coming through the process. This is derived from doorstep collection. There is a risk that somebody might put the wrong thing in there, but the process now I think is far better, and the use of the PAS 100 inspection system I think is pretty robust and gives us rather a good product. Certainly in my experience, we are buying this compost and using it to grow produce. Yeah.
I would say, Paul, actually, that it's very variable. I think there are some very good producers out there, and there's still a lot of problems with other producers. So I think you do have to be careful sourcing even past 100 compost.
Okay, well, thanks, Ben. Okay, well, it's nice to have that challenge. That's why you're there. Thank you. Okay. Well, I would say in response, yeah, I think Ben has a good point there, and I guess the answer always is to have a look yourself. So we're about to buy, tens of tons of this in the next few weeks, and I'm looking for a sample to be delivered in the next few days to have a look at this, and hopefully that sample will represent my bulk delivery. But if it doesn't, I've got a very good legal case to send it back. The link at the bottom there, qualitycompost.org.uk, that's a link that will take you through to the organisation that controls and regulates that industry, and you can find a local supplier to have a look at that. But I would encourage the buyers to think about that. For their growers, if we can improve their organic matter levels, that would be a really good passport to improve soil. Okay, one slight diversion here, and that's something that I do. Well, we do ourselves on our own farm, and I'm seeing more and more, and that's just the use of biological plastics and biodegradable plastics. And we found these to be quite interesting in terms of their ability to retain moisture and also to use fertilizer more effectively. So for a given input of nutrients, whether that's organic or non-organic, we're seeing far better yields under this sort of management regime. There are some issues with it. I know it's a plastic. I know it does decay to some extent. But you can see where we had a very challenging, in fact, the field on the top left-hand side, we were just about given because it contained such high levels of equisetum, of horsetail. And using plastic, we were able to actually farm that for the first couple of years and produce something worthwhile and yet contain that weed. Also, to make better use of water and also the fertilizer. And the other one we've been looking at is how to use soil more effectively. We wanted to think about getting in a crop for the winter, something that would cover the ground and reduce, the impact of rain. And so for us, we've tried about a dozen different, largely brassicas, Mizuna, Mibuna, Komatsuna, Pak Choi, and also the winter purslane to the left-hand side there, all of which I think, or the majority of which have been quite effective for us in that we've actually had something there to protect the soil. And then at the end of the winter, I think that we can then harvest and include in our sales. And that's been quite a nice investigation for us. And one way which we think, well, there some nutrient depletion, but we think that's giving us a better option than having bare soil. A quick look at rotation. We are specialized. We did hear about a neighbor of one of our open days that had grown brassicas in the same field for 36 years. Astonishing. But the pH was very high, and that does help. But I think anything we can do to begin to improve our rotations would be so helpful. And we are seeing quite a lot of cooperation between farmers, even where they are very specialized, actually able to swap land with somebody else who works with a different buyer, a different contract, and that's been quite encouraging. And then one slide here, just to, I know it's an arable crop, it's oilseed rape, but just to give you some idea of the benefit to yield where we can improve our rotation. So where we can come in just, very occasionally, once every 4, 5, 6 years, then we can see a much better yield in there. And the growers who are coming out with the record yields are those with rotations of 7, 8, or 9 years in most cases. And then a bit of a run here of green manures, again, looking for practical ways to improve the soil, protect the soil, and encourage farmers to sort of move forward. I'll just highlight those 3 things there in bold. The thing that really defines these for me is to maintain the transpiration rate. So the loss of water, where I'm growing, which is up further north of most people, we certainly have too much rain, and we have too much rain at the wrong time of year. So if I can keep a crop in the ground through the winter, then I'm losing moisture right through that winter. And when I come to spring cultivations, I've got the advantage of a soil with less moisture and less water. I can protect and maintain not just nutrients, but plant available nutrients, and they're not the same. So that where a plant can take up a nutrient and then begin to break down and decay and go back through the cycle, that we understand that those nutrients are therefore more available to other plants. And also the principal thing for us is that we can contribute to nitrogen retention and to the production of the next crop. So nitrogen for us, we're growing organically in our example. Nitrogen for us is something that we have to try and defend and hang on to where we can. And the green manures are certainly doing that for us. A bit more discussion there, some research there just to demonstrate that point, that we can improve nitrogen use efficiency, and you know, the benefit of the next crop is certainly for us quite significant. And that was shared, I'm pleased to say, across quite a few farms in our Great Soils open days. Just a few here of examples of different green manures. This one was being used by Vitacress, and we discussed this both on site in the public domain and again back at the Oxford Farming Conference, Oxford Real Farming Conference, and where they'd use grazing rye for the winter just to give some cover. Quite a big impact. I've yet to have the figures, but there was a sizable difference in the amount of diesel required to prepare their soils. There was a less need for nutrient application, and also quite a significant cost in the wear and tear on implements as well. Okay, grazing rye does seem to be a popular choice if you're looking for a green manure. It is quite a fast-growing item, very, very deep-rooted as well. And vetch, again, sometimes grown with the rye, very, very fast growing. It's a legume, so we've got nitrogen fixation, very high yielding, though doesn't like to have its feet in water. And then just in the next line down there, it does have some toxicity towards livestock, although it is widely grown in Europe, so I don't quite understand that. And also, it is this word allelopathic, so it will retard and impede the growth of other plants, given the chance. As with a lot of plants, they are competitive and they want to grow well themselves and stop their competition. So if this is being used as a green manure, there is a need then to make sure there's a sufficient gap between that being grown and the next crop being sown. Otherwise, there may be some, you may find that germination is impeded.
And is that an issue for some of the intensive horticultural crops where you've got
yes,
multiple crops within a rotation? It's
I would say that perhaps not as much as we know. I mean, I know that farmers are using it and growing it and then coming in just after it and not really reporting problems, but I would just be a bit careful. I'd want to have a couple of weeks between that being incorporated and then going back in with something to be sown. If it's transplanted, that might be a way of getting around that. Yeah. Okay. And then this guy here, Berseem clover. I'm seeing this popping up in the north of England in quite a big way. I'm seeing it amongst conventional growers, amongst arable producers. It's sitting in beneath their oilseed rape. This is quite a big seed, and one of the issues with clover is it's actually quite hard to make it settle on the seedbed and to germinate there. Often the seed beds are not firm enough for clover. I was always advised that you had to be able to ride your bike across the soil in order for the soil to be hard enough to take a clover crop. So it's a big seed, it doesn't disappear, it stays near the surface, it's frost hardy down to -6, -15, and it can cope with high rainfall. Now that's not a problem if you're down south where Ben is, but up here we need that. And my colleagues across at Base UK, the no-till guys are certainly getting into this in a big way. And part of our research is to learn from them and see what they're doing with it. Crimson clover, this one I quite like because it tends to become sparse. Once it's got going, it goes quite quickly and quite a good weed suppression, but it then becomes quite sparse. So if this is being used as a green manure or in tandem with a growing crop, then it's competition, it doesn't give as much competition once it's got going. Persian clover, in research that we've seen by Hollanders, this was the exception. This was a very, very, very fast emergence, very fast growth rate, attracts beneficial insects, a very attractive legume to think about using alongside some of the horticultural crops. And then I think this might be our last one of these, Phacelia. This has been a soil improver for many, many years. It was recognized in Germany, gosh, 50 years ago or so. It's taking hold in this country. If you're looking to, and we did see 1 or 2 glasshouse growers who are looking for a crop just to give the soil a rest and really take a break from very intensive production and gain some organic matter, then this might be for you. So very rapid establishment, very deep rooted, can become quite stemmy, quite lignified, but that could then give you, the benefit of perhaps a couple of years of organic matter. Other green manures to consider: chicory, buckwheat, and lupins all have their own particular benefits. You can see there for yourself: increased phosphate uptake, or increased mobility of phosphate, and improved potassium uptake for chicory. As a form of weed control, I think that's something that might be attractive to just a few of our audience. But there is some interest in using green manures as a sort of inter-row crop to suppress weeds and also provide nitrogen. A quick summary of research on green manures: we do have a strong correlation between early ground cover and nitrogen fixation. The smaller seeds are more difficult to work with. And the downside is that where we've got that really good development, we do also have the danger of suppressing our crop as well. But Persian clover was the standout fastest to emerge and get some ground cover. Okay, getting towards the end, you'll be pleased to hear. So where are we going next? This was the last of our Great Soils events that we did up in the at Stockbridge Technology Centre up in Cawood, Selby in Yorkshire. And you can't see quite so well. This is back about a month ago. The crop hadn't really begun to move yet, but this is white clover being used as the green manure, and both white and red clover are very commonly used as green manures. But this white clover is being used in a strip tillage system. So on the bottom right-hand side there, you can see a Swiss-made machine that's designed to, if you like, work amongst this crop, and because it's guided by satellite navigation, can come and do so every year back in the same place. We can maintain a strip of white clover between our main crop, and we can come back year after year doing that. If we wanted to, we can encourage the clover to move across the entire field and then come back and rotate that growth to where the clover was, and if you like, move the clover to where the crop was. This is being done with quite a range of arable crops, and I think now we've got the potential, particularly with Stockbridge, to research the idea of that being used amongst horticultural crops. Top right-hand side there, sorry, Ben.
I was going to say, Paul, it's just worth noting that there's also Innovative Farmers Field Lab down at Riverford in Devon looking at strip tillage in vegetables as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Ben. Yeah, and the top right-hand side there, that was placing liquid phosphorus at depth. You can see the little spikes there going down about sort of 8 or 10 centimeters. So that the phosphorus therefore is being being made more available to the plant. Sometimes we apply phosphate as a granule on the surface, and there is an issue there with that being lost to the environment. But that seemed to be a more effective way of doing it. Down to my last couple of slides. We're talking now about the direction of travel the next few years. One thing that you probably know about already is that the future farming consultation, that right now DEFRA is looking for your opinions, your thoughts about where agriculture, food, the entire rural economy should be going in the next 25 years. I've just been to the first of those consultations. There's another one next week, and there are, I think, another half dozen or so across the country. I'd recommend that, having seen who's with us today, do make sure that you're represented at those discussions. Okay. One more thing for you as well, and that's our network day. So this is our Innovative Farmers project, and a chance to come and discover, if you like, for the first time, what this program's all about, and find out what we've been doing so far with our field labs. It's all about farmers, being given the freedom to think about what research they would like to pursue. And so we've got farmers there speaking, we've got our research projects being shared, and we've got both farmers and also some of the researchers speaking there, and there'll be some technical sessions on soil, cover crops, arable and horticulture and livestock, and there's a link up there to find out more about that. I suspect that Ben will want to say a bit more about that as well. Is that right?
Well, not necessarily. Only to say that the AHDB are sponsoring some field labs going forward. So there's an opportunity to talk about both the ones that have happened as part of Great Soils, but some of the ones that are going forward supported by AHDB.
Great, great. Okay, well, I'm going to stop there. I don't know if that's enough for now for you, but that's who I am. So I'm a farming advisor with the Soil Association and also do some teaching at college too. There are some references there as well, but I'll take you back to that slide. So I don't know if there are some questions, Ben, whether you want to
we've got one,
some of those.
One that's come up. Yeah, we've got one that's come up. Do you think sulfur is a good idea for alkaline soils? That's from Hello.
Oh, okay. Yeah. No, well, I mean, I'm often asked the question, how can I get pH to come down if my pH is too high? And it's something that I've never had to do myself. I've lived and worked amongst acidic soils my whole life, but I understand that sulfur can be an effective way to bring down pH. So if your pH is too high, then that can certainly be an effective way of doing that. It's a principal part of our plant proteins as well. If you look at what farmers are applying to the ground in the last 5 years, last 20 years, I would say that we now apply sulfur far more than we ever used to. When I was first involved in farming a long time ago, 1970s, we had, I think, 55 kilograms per hectare delivered for free, courtesy of acid rain. So that's gone largely, and so there is a need to apply sulfur. And for some time, I think we didn't recognise that, but certainly it has a very important role to play. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. I mean, I did have another question as well. You mentioned earlier in the presentation about soil biology and about how much our knowledge has increased on that over the years. One of the things we were looking at as part of the Great Soils project was how much we could learn from the soil biology testing that's available now. Do you have a sort of sense of that, and whether it's worth spending money on these detailed soil biology tests?
Yeah, that's a tough question, Ben. I mean, I'm curious to see what is in there, what's going on with that soil. What I'm not clear about really is how to fully understand that answer. If I'm told exactly what's in that soil, what species are present, what numbers are present, I'm not yet at the stage where I could say with confidence, well, that means I've got a very healthy soil. I think by and large, having a very active, biologically alive soil with a great diversity of species must be a benefit. If I'm looking at pathogenic bacteria, pathogenic nematodes, and other sort of parasites, if they're coming into a very mixed environment, I think they've got far less chance of actually affecting my crop. But that's, for me at the moment, Ben, I think that's all I could say about it. Certainly where we see soils that are very much alive biologically, we can say that the responsible organic matter to break down and generate plant available nutrients is much higher, and also that availability really responds well to temperature, so that the availability of nutrients becomes much better just when it's needed. It's actually the perfect time, and so I can go that far, Ben, I think.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, we don't seem to have any more questions from delegates, which hopefully means you've answered all of their questions. So thank you all very much for attending. The Great Soils project that the three partners I mentioned earlier have been working on finishes actually at the end of this week. So this is just about the last activity as part of it. The full report from the programme will be out in the next couple of months. And there'll be links to a whole range of documents and case studies, some of which Paul referred to, but many of which aren't. And if you look on the AHDB Great Soils pages, there's already a lot of information up there, videos, blogs and case studies and things, but more will be coming onto that as it goes forward. Sorry, we just had a question about CDP points available for the webinar. So I don't know the answer to that, but Astrid, I think, will probably put something as a reply to me, so I can answer that.
Sorry, I'm here. So we can certainly share details of CPD points with delegates after the webinar.
Great, thank you, Astrid. So we can sort that out. So I think that's it from me, and thank you, Paul, and thank you to AHDB for organising the webinar. Paul, did you have any final comments?
I think I've had my say, and thank you very much indeed for those who joined us. I hope that was appropriate for you. I hope it wasn't too much too quickly. I always tempted to say far too much in far too short a time. I am aware of that. If you have further questions, you know, my email address is there somewhere. If I can just click back on there. So pflin@soilassociation.org, and we're happy to take questions by phone, by email. Do please make sure that we leave you without questions that you haven't had answered. Yeah, that's, I think,
absolutely. And as we say, we've recorded the session, so it will be available to watch again, and you can access the slides.
Yeah, great. And thank you, Ben. Thank you, Astrid.
Thank you all very much. Goodbye.